It's difficult sometimes to know if human psychology created institutions in its own image, or that the institutions we've created fostered or advanced our ideologies. I suspect it's a bit of both, that politics and cultures produce environments which exercise more humane or more vile behaviors, rewarding our lack of too much self-reflection. And also, our language limits and cognizance of self themselves produce only a finite set of cultural norms. I raise these abstract questions in part because we're in one of those periods now where a little self-reflection, whether fostered and valued or not, would do us some real good. If we cannot diagnose the source or cause of the problem, how can we repair it? But also, as I read, it's become more clear that Arendt may not be certain where she falls on this either, as she tries to explain how the totalitarian form of government came about and the Holocaust perpetuated. On the one hand, Arendt suggests that many of the perpetrators of racism and atrocity are themselves creations of the systems they inhabit. We saw that all the way back in the Dreyfus Affair, as we see it in the previous chapter in her reasoning around race thinking as ideology. And now we see it as she makes a quick study of Africa, particularly of the Boer and British governance of South Africa and the British bureaucracy in Egypt. In each of these cases, she marks the overarching political motivations of the colonial machine. Expansion for profit, then expansion for the sake of expansion, then South Africa's gold and diamond production, which is superfluous to economic production, then to Egypt's noble bureaucratic mission to govern those who would not govern themselves. All of these make for people the most virtuous and the most ignoble, she suggests, who get swept up in empire, made into functionaries for a system that cares nothing for them, but who perpetuate cruelties in the name of this abstract cause. In this way, she implies that they are not entirely responsible for it. Now that's on the one hand, and I've already suggested that I'm not entirely with her on that. But she does point out here that the grinding imperialist machine allows little time for self-reflection, or, where it does, only as much as permits us to see our European selves in the place of savior of land and civilization, and, incidentally, other people, in the long run. It's the kind of idea-making we see from Rudyard Kipling in works like Kim or White Man's Burden, both which Arendt makes some use of. On the other hand, that other hand which might argue that wicked and cruel people build cultures that reflect their own foul capacities, she offers something a little different. For as much as Arendt's history depends upon wit-dulled puppet thinkers like Kipling, like Cecil Rhodes, like Arthur de Gobineau, she also leans heavily here on Joseph Conrad's diagnosis of mankind and exploitation of Africa. And while the passages quoted do align with Arendt's conception of the blind cruelty of Kurtz, Arendt paints all of Europe in similar styles. And perhaps she does so understanding that Conrad's argument is not at all about how societies produce cruelty, but quite the opposite, that it is the human psychology, ego-centered and bestial in its conception of self, which perpetuates violence upon the other it meets. Alone and stripped of everything, Kurtz still whispers the horror, alone as he finally is with himself. To underscore this sum, Arendt spends a fair amount of time with Boer psychology. Now, the Boers were originally mostly Dutch settlers of South Africa assigned to offer supplies to ships passing around the Cape of Good Hope on their trade missions to India and the East. The word Boer simply means farmer. Otherwise left to themselves for settlement and governance, they turned to the local native population, the black Africans, for labor. What grew from this was a kind of cultural sense of godlike superiority and modest comfort, Arendt tells us. By the time the British arrived to mine gold and diamonds, the Boers looked fairly unlike anything European and frankly resisted coming back to the Western fold. Here, without baldly saying so, Arendt suggests that the Boers were truly enacting a kind of innate psychology upon their neighborhood other, all in the self-interest of freeing themselves from labor. In this way, Arendt's citing of Conrad seems to be apt. But in the end, Arendt can have it both ways. The Boers created a new, though fairly simple, livelihood from servitude, and the broad-minded British built a similar exploitation on the precepts of imperialist expansion. Both psychology and institutions operated in parallel, and perhaps most significantly, despite their political differences, the Boer and British often cooperated in this exploitation, though it was motivated in different ways. The only reason there was a British-Boer War was due largely to miscommunication, not due to politics. So, damn, what are we to think? Our political and cultural constructions, like bureaucracy, may offer us a cover for our barbarities, our administrative massacres and trolley problems and denials of health care and food aid and immigration identification. They even work to punish us for asking too many questions of ourselves about them in the names of duty, patriotism, and service. The banal evil Arendt lands on later. But so long as we're offered nothing to dialogue with our own egos, our own self-serving might-is-right mindsets, we are still, at the center of all the lies we build, the authors of our own cruelties.